Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight to our Nechama Price Shir, which we do 4 times a year. Tonight's Shir is on dealing with difficult relationships, Moshe and Yitro. And you probably all know by now, but Nechama Price is the director of Yeshiva University's graduate program for advanced Talmud studies, from which she earned certification in 2003. She is the senior lecturer in the Bible and Judaic Studies department at Stern College, where she has been teaching since 2004. Nechama earned a master's degree in Jewish education from Azrieli Graduate School and an MA in Bible from the Bernard Revel Graduate School. She's also a graduate of the inaugural class of the American branch of Nishmat's Yoetzet Halacha program and currently serves as Yoetzet Halacha to the communities of Englewood, Tenafly, Livingston, West Orange, and Long Branch, New Jersey. She is a community scholar and speaks all over America. She lives in Bergenfield, New Jersey with her husband and 4 children, and we are really excited to welcome her back, and we hope that somewhere down the line we will be in person instead of on Zoom, but we're happy at least to have her here on Zoom. So without further ado, here is Nechama. If you're not muted, I would just ask you to please mute, and that's it. There you go.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Dara, for always organizing all these shiurim. I was asked to also announce that everybody should remember that, and I look forward to seeing you, that West Orange is having a mikvah event on January 16th, so it'll be wonderful to see everybody there as well. I am always privileged to be the Yoetzet Halacha of this community. I love being your Yoetzet. Anybody have any questions in terms of Nida, mikvah, fertility, relationships, sexuality, all those, birth control, please send them my way. This is not a Nida shir. I just have to give that introduction. I love getting your phone calls. I love getting your questions. So please continue to send them my way. Continue to call me. Do not feel bad ever to give me that call. But today we're here, even though it kind of relates to me being a Yoetzet, we're talking about a difficult relationship, but we're really coming together to have a shir having to do with this week's parsha. Before I begin, I would like to share with you on the chat the source sheet, but I'm also going to share screen, so the sources will be for you right there on the screen. But in case somebody wants to be able to download it or look at it on their own, I'm sending it right now to everyone in the chat. That is, you just click it and that will open the source sheet for you. If somebody comes on later in the chat and asks for the source sheet, but I'm in the middle of giving shir, just copy that, please, that link, and give it to that person, because I'm about to share screen and I will no longer be able to see the chat. So I'm going to share screen with you. Okay, here we go. Everybody sees my source sheet? Thank you. All right, amazing. So, you know, I was looking into giving a shir on the relationship of Moshe and Yitro. So obviously you can realize just from the start which relationship it is that I am referring to when I say difficult relationships. But when I started to write this shir, I remember I was talking to my children and I said, you know, I'm going to write a shir on the relationship of in-laws. And right away, one of them, I won't say which one, said to me, oh, you want to hear a joke? And their joke went, I'm sure you've all heard it before, what's the difference between an in-law and an outlaw? And the answer, of course, is outlaws are wanted. Now, maybe people chuckle when they hear jokes like that, but I was wondering when I heard that joke, why is it that we make jokes about the relationship of in-laws with each other? Why is it that we find this relationship in particular makes us want to make fun and make jokes about this relationship? So as always, as you know, because I've given so many shiurim, Baruch Hashem, in your community, whenever I have these types of questions, I always look to stories and Tanakh to try to feel and gain some perspective as to what I'm supposed to learn from this difficult relationship of the son-in-law to the in-law to the mother-in-law and the father-in-law, all these types of different relationships. But what I do believe by the end of this year, the messages that will come through this year, we will be able to attribute them to all difficult relationships or all relationships, you know, parent-child relationship, friendships, spousal relationships, you know, sibling relationships. Certainly the messages of dealing with the in-law relationship is also going to come through in terms of all relationships. But anyway, I wanted to start by looking through Tanakh to try to like figure out, you know, what do they view? What is the view in Tanakh of in-law relationships? And what I realized is, just like in today's world, some are positive, some are negative, some are somewhere in between. Mind you, just as a starter, my relationship with my in-laws is very positive. That didn't inspire is on. I love you. It's all great. But, and I've given this year in her presence, so don't worry. But, in Tanakh, we have kind of that mixture as well. So I wanted to start off positive. It's always nice to start off positive. So as you see on the source sheet, the first relationship that you have in front of you is the relationship of Ruth and Naomi. Now, Ruth and Naomi is a very positive mother-in-law, daughter-in-law relationship. We all know the story that we read every Shavuos. Ruth leaves her entire life behind to help and to live alongside her mother-in-law, Naomi. She picks food off the ground in order to support her own mother-in-law and feed them both. And at the end of the story, she hands over her child to her mother-in-law. And what's interesting, I just gave you an exampling from the Psukim. If you look through the Megillah here in source number 1, how many times they are referred to by this relationship? When we're talking about Ruth HaMoaviyah, Kalata, her daughter-in-law, comes with her. And then when we refer to Naomi over and over again, Chamota, the mother-in-law, Chamota, to her Kalata, to her Kalata, to her Chamota. Over and over again, the stress of this relationship of the daughter-in-law to the mother-in-law. And of course, if we continue to look in the Psukim, you would look at this as an ideal relationship to the extent here in source 2, Vatas kechol asher sivta chamota. The story continues, and Ruth, the daughter-in-law, does everything that her mother-in-law asked her to do. The relationship is really quite wonderful, to the extent at the very end of the Megillah, their relationship is praised. The women come to Naomi and say, wow, you are incredibly lucky. The daughter-in-law that you love so much, who's now given birth as a child for you, Shiva Banim. She's even better than 7 sons. Now that's the ultimate compliment in Tanakh. Even though in today's world, Baruch Hashem, we love daughters the same way we love sons. In the times of the Torah, sons were, of course, the bigger prize to have than daughters. And 7 sons, whoa, that's like the ultimate. She is better than 7 sons is certainly the ultimate compliment. So first relationship we see, very, very positive. But we don't have to look very far, especially if we go backwards to Sefer Bereshit, to see a relationship that's a lot more complicated. The relationship of Lavan, right, and Yaakov, Lavan being Yaakov's father-in-law. It starts off also very positive here in source 3, but they're not yet father-in-law and son-in-law. It starts off positive when he's the nephew. Yaakov's the nephew running away because Esav wants to kill him. Vayeratz lekraso, he runs, right? Lavan knows that he's coming. He runs out towards him. Vayechabeklo, he hugs him, and Asheklo, he kisses him. It's a beautiful reunion. They've never met before, but it's a beautiful meeting of the future father-in-law to the future son-in-law. But at the time, it's an uncle to a nephew. To when Lavan says to him, we're flesh and blood, come, be part of my family. And everything seems to be so wonderful, moves into his home, everything is great. Until, of course, he becomes the son-in-law. And when he becomes the son-in-law, right away, there's problems. Because as we all know, Lavan gives him the wrong daughter. Right away, the morning of that he becomes the son-in-law, he goes yelling at his father-in-law, he goes yelling at Lavan, Mazos asita li, what did you do to me? Alo barachela vadati why did you trick me? Why did you do this to me? And as the story continues, their relationship gets harder and harder. I just want to make sure that my screen and my mouse is moving in front of you. Those who have your video on, yes? So you're following along with me beautifully. In source number 4, as the relationship goes on, after he works for Lavan for 14 years, he then puts himself at a distance from his father-in-law. He needs a little bit of a break from him. He's like, okay, a 3-day distance. We're kind of moving a little bit apart. But that doesn't work either. Lavan thinks that Yaakov is stealing from him. Things are not going very well. Source 5, 6 more years go by. Vayar Yaakov, it's Penei Lavan, things are not going well. Lavan's not looking at me the same way. It's time for us to leave. And that's, of course, when Yaakov runs away. They run away. Lavan has to hear about it. Vayugad Lavan, he finds out. Kibarach Yaakov has run away. And his reaction is, he runs after him. He chases after him. Now, why he runs after him, different understandings to the story. Source number 6, the typical one that we know from the Haggadah, from Pesach, he runs after him to kill him. He runs after him to harm him. Lavan bikesh lakor et hakol kasher radav achar Yaakov. He wants to destroy it all. He wants to destroy Yaakov. So here we go from a beautiful relationship to, fast forward a number of years, his own father-in-law wants to murder him. His own father is trying to chase him down to kill him. Why does he not kill him? Because God comes to him here in source 6, Vayavo Elokim Lavan harami b'chalom halayli, comes in a dream and says, don't you dare touch him. So Lavan leaves him alone, but his intentions were to harm his own son-in-law. The other possibility, and I would say more pshat a little bit, in source number 7, is that he was really chasing after Yaakov, not to hurt him, but to say goodbye to his daughters, to say goodbye to his grandchildren. He's never going to see them again. And of course, that's how the story concludes. He kisses all of them goodbye, he blesses them, and he goes home. The end of the relationship of Yaakov and Lavan is to depart from each other, is to never see each other again. And of course, both of them to move on to their separate lives. If I want to go from, I would say, the most positive to kind of this middle strange one to the most negative, I would jump to that relationship of Shaul and David. Shaul and David, as we know, once again, begin their relationship very positively. Before David marries the daughter of Shaul, he loves him. David comes to the palace to play some music for him so that it causes him to have better moods, because Shaul gets all these bad moods. Source 8, he loves him. Fast forward, he kills Goliath the giant. He's offered to marry Mirav, but then he ends up marrying Michal, Shaul's daughter. They now become father-in-law and father-in-law and son-in-law, and all these terrible things start to happen. Source number 9, just 2 stories. There's so many I could have chosen, but these I think are the highlights. One day, David's playing the music for him. Shaul picks up his spear and throws it at David. Not once, but twice. Baruch Hashem misses him, but clearly is trying to kill David. This pasuk to me was so harsh. Vayhi Shaul oyev et David kol hayamim. Shaul is David's enemy for all of his days, and even to the extent one parak later, not only is Shaul trying to murder David, but vayidaber Shaul Yonatan benova kol avadav. He instructs Yonatan, which of course Yonatan doesn't listen, but he instructs all of his servants lahamit et David. So much so, Shaul has an issue with his son-in-law. So much so, he's scared he's going to lose his malucha, his kingdom, to his own son-in-law. He instructs all of his servants to go and kill David. So just from the start, any difficult relationship that we might have, I think if we put it in comparison to that of Shaul and David, we all feel better, right? So we could stop now. We don't have such a terrible relationship, so things are okay. But I would like to move on, obviously, to what I would call the most confusing, the most complicated, the most ambiguous father-in-law, son-in-law relationship, which of course appears in this week's Parsha, which is that of Yitro. I see that I have a different title on here. I apologize on the one that I gave you. But anyway, the story of Yitro and Moshe begins in this week's Parsha, and there really are 2 different stories that I want to analyze, at least from the start, which is the story in Shemot Perek Bet, which is their first encounter, the first time that they, meet each other, and Moshe marries within the family and becomes the son-in-law. And then fast forward to Parshas Yitro, when they reunite with each other after Yetziat Mitzrayim. So let's start by looking at this relationship of Moshe and Yitro from a positive perspective. Let's always start with the positive. Let's look at it in a very beautiful light, the 2 of them having a wonderful relationship, but then I'm going to flip it on you. So if we start from the very beginning, where we see this positive relationship here in source number 10, let's take the story that we all know, a nice chazara for this week's Parsha, a nice review. Moshe is running away from Paro because he kills an Egyptian and Paro wants to kill him. So he's running away and he ends up at a well. And when he's at this well, he sees that there are these shepherds who are bothering this group of girls. And of course, Moshe, being the good person that he is, goes and he saves them. Now, these girls run home and tell their father, we met this hero at the well. And the dad initiates the relationship with Moshe. He yells at his daughters, Lama ze'azatem et haish. Why did you leave him at the well? What's your problem? Such a great guy and you left him at the well? Kirena lo v'yachal lechem. Come on, bring him home. We want to enjoy, let's meet him. Let's bring him to our table. Let's bring him, into our home. It's initiated by Yitro that Moshe comes into the home, but he doesn't just come and have a meal. He stays there for a long period of time. He remains there. He delays there for a long period of time, to the extent that Yitro invites him to be part of the family. Yitro offers Sipora to Moshe. I want you to be part of my family. I want you to be my son-in-law. So therefore, please marry my daughter. Not only that, I want you to be part of the family business. And therefore, in the next parak, Moshe Yaroet Son Yitro, he becomes part of the family business by becoming the shepherd, and he shepherds Yitro's sheep. From the beginning, this story actually parallels in so many ways the story I just just spoke to you about, which is the initial story of Lavan and Yaakov, when things were actually pretty good in the beginning. We have a man who's running away from a relative who wants to kill him. Yaakov is running from Esav. Moshe is running from Paro. They get invited into the home. Lavan invites Yaakov in. Yitro invites Moshe in. They allows him to live there. He gives him a job, provides him, a way to support himself, and then at the end gives over one of their children or two of their daughters, right? In the case of Lavan, and therefore Yaakov and Moshe become part of the family. But I want to stress how pretty incredible this story is, especially from Yitro's perspective, because you have to understand Yaakov and Moshe are running for their lives, right? That somebody wants to kill them. And even from Lavan's perspective, he didn't know Esav wasn't going to chase Yaakov down and try to murder the entire family. He didn't know that. But from Yitro's perspective, it's even stronger, because we're talking about Paro. We're talking about the biggest power of the world. But Paro for sure could have sent messengers to track down Moshe and murder anyone that Moshe is associated with. So the fact that Yitro allows Moshe within the home, a fugitive within his home, is actually a pretty incredible thing for Yitro to do. And if I look closely at the language, as I mentioned it now, this is all about Yitro. The relationship of Moshe really seems to be with Yitro, not necessarily with any daughter in particular. And even when he marries Sipporah, it still seems to be about Yitro. Vayoel Moshe lashevet et ha'ish. He wants to stay with the man, so the man gives him a daughter to marry, so he could stay within the house of the man. What man? Of course, Yitro. And that makes sense why here in source 12, when Moshe wants to leave, the house of Yitro, he doesn't ask permission from his wife, because everything that has to do with him being in this family has to do with Yitro. He has to go to Yetzer Chotzno, he has to go to his father-in-law Yitro and ask him for permission. Can I please go down to Mitzrayim and gain the permission of Yitro? Because his entire relationship is with Yitro, this beautiful, positive relationship that they have. So you might ask, why? What is it about Yitro that made Moshe decide that this is the special guy that I want to have such a relationship with? And we can answer it in one of three ways. Either one, he's special because he's the guy that invited him in. Here's a fugitive who's running away, and Yitro says, no problem, come into my home. So Moshe felt very indebted to him. He had nowhere to go, and here's the guy that lets him in. Or two, in the Psukim, it says numerous times about Yitro, he's Kohen Midyan. He was the priest in Midyan. And you can understand Moshe, who's coming from the palace, who's used to prestige, who's used to people, who have titles and people who are important. He would be attracted to somebody who's significant within the land of Midyan as well. Or I can argue, based on Rashi here in source 13, that they had similar values. Maybe they even had similar spiritual values. Said Rashi, what's so special about Yitro? Peirash lo me'avodah zara. Everybody around him in Midyan is serving avodah zara. Yitro is the one who came to some sort of realization of God and separated himself from avodah zara. Ibn Ezra says Yitro haya kohen Hashem. He was a kohen of Hashem. So here Moshe in the whole land of Midyan found the one guy who has the same values as him. Of course he attached himself to him, and of course their relationship would be very, very close. Beautiful. Fast forward now to our next encounter of Moshe and Yitro. What a beautiful relationship. Moshe now has to leave his father-in-law behind because he's got to go save the Jewish people from Mitzrayim. So he had to leave his father-in-law behind. But now comes their reunion, their beautiful reunion. Fast forward to Shmo Parak Yochet, to Parshas Yitro. Well, let's look at the psukim inside. Again, everything's about Yitro. Vayishma Yitro, Kohen Midyan Chotein Moshe. Yitro hears what's going on with his son-in-law. Who is he? We are reminded. He's Chotein Moshe. He's the father-in-law. What does he do? Veikach Yitro. He takes the family. Who is he? Pasuk reminds me again. Chotein Moshe, the father-in-law of Moshe. Vayavo Yitro. Yitro comes. Who is he? Chotein Moshe. You see the repetition? Because the significance of the relationship, like we saw by Megillas Rus, over and over, we're being reminded this is the father-in-law of Moshe. And here comes Yitro. He hears about Moshe. He takes the family. He comes to Moshe. The reunion is really all about Yitro and Moshe. And that's exactly what occurs. Pasuk Zion, he finally sees Moshe. Vayetze Moshe lekrat chotzno. He comes to greet his father-in-law. The beautiful relationship. Vayishtachu, he bows to him. Vayishaklo, he kisses him. Vayishalu ish l're'eu. They're asking, how you doing? How's everything going? And he brings him inside his home. Moshe's so excited to see this father-in-law. They have such a beautiful relationship where he hasn't seen in such a long time. So what does he do? He can't stop talking. Vayisaper Moshe chotno. It's kol asher asa Hashem. Let me tell you the story. Let me tell you everything that's happened. He's so incredibly excited to see his father-in-law, to the extent that the Midrash even says about Moshe, Mikana Moshe, hey Adam Muchan lekavod chamav. Look how much so we could learn from Moshe, how important it is to give honor to your own father-in-law. What a beautiful story. But the story continues. We're not done. Source 15. He says, okay, the next day, I'm so excited to see you, but I don't want to keep you to myself. I want you to meet all my friends. So he takes him out the next day. Who? His father-in-law. Again, Hotein Moshe, reminding us. They give korbanos together. He gets to meet Aaron, his brother, all the Zakanim. They all eat bread with him. Oh, it's wonderful. Meet all my friends. But that's not even enough. We continue. Pasuk Yud Gimel. Come to work with me, father-in-law. Come. I want you to see everything that I do. It's such a beautiful relationship. So the next day, Moshe says, I'm going to go judge the Jewish people. I'm going to do my job. Why don't you come with me? Yitro comes with him. And here's where the story gets interesting. He sees what Moshe is doing. And his response is not what Moshe expected. Moshe expected him to be proud. Moshe expected him to be excited. And his reaction is different. What is going on? Why are you sitting here all by yourself? From the perspective of Yitro, again, I'm in the positive mode of this story. From the perspective of Yitro, who does he care about in the story? He cares about Moshe. If you think about it from that perspective, Yitro makes a lot of sense. From the Jewish people's perspective, of course, every single person, who do you want to talk to? The main guy. You want to talk to Moshe. So Moshe's killing himself, letting him be exposed to every person and every issue. Yitro comes and says, the only guy I care about is you, Moshe. You're my son-in-law. So from that perspective, what are you doing? You're killing yourself. This is crazy. So therefore, listen to my advice. What's my advice? Get other people to help you. Why? What's my one factor that I care about? I want it to be easier for you. I want other people to carry the burden with you. Why should it all be on you? From the perspective of this beautiful relationship, Yitro is looking out for Moshe. That's all he cares about. He's not connected to the Jewish people. He cares about Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore, if I look closely at the Psukim, what it sounds like what's going on is Moshe says to Yitro, hey, you're right. Never thought about it from that perspective. And you know what? That's a pretty smart thing to do. And I respect you. So clearly, everything you say has to be something that I think is very wise. And here comes Moshe, who takes the advice of Yitro. I may do a nice chart here in source 16. I'm keeping my eyes on the clock. I know you have something at 8, so I'm going to keep going fast. But here in source 16, you see very clearly here on my chart, this is what Yitro is telling him to do. And this is what Moshe does. And it's almost word for word. Yitro tells him to go find these wise people, Anshe Chayil. So Moshe goes and he finds Anshe Chayil. He tells him to appoint Sarei Elafim, Sarei Meot, appoint all these officers. It's exactly what he did. Sarei Elafim, Sarei Meot. And then have them judge the people. Same words, Shaftuat Ambachol 8. And then what's the idea? How do we split it up? If it's something that's big, they should go to you. But if it's something that's small, these judges should do it instead. And that's exactly how Moshe sets it up. And if that wasn't clear from the Psukim, that it's like so parallel word for word what he does, the Pasuk even comes to tell us to make sure we got the point. Source 17, Vayishma Moshe L'kol Chotno Vayas Kol Asher Amar. Moshe does everything that his father-in-law told him to do, right? Similar Pasuk we saw by Russ and Ami. Everything he told him to do, Moshe does to the T, listens to his father-in-law, respects his father-in-law so much. Okay, great. But now it's time for Yitro to go home. His visit is over. Moshe's probably very upset. He has to let go of his father-in-law. Says the pasuk, "Vayishalach Moshe chotno vayilech lo al artzo." He's sad and he sends his father-in-law off. What does it mean? He sends his father-in-law off. Comes the Mechelta and says, "Natano matano rabot." He sends him off with gifts. He sends him off with stuff. He sends him off with respect. He was so sad that his father-in-law was leaving. Or Ibn Ezra, "Vayishlach derakavod," meaning like Avraham, holechimam l'shalcham. He escorts him. He walks with him part of the way, the respect that he gives him. Or the Da'at Mikra, which I'll say outside, he gives him permission to go. Says the Da'at Mikra, it's interesting. When Moshe was in Yitro's home, then he needed Yitro's permission to leave. Now Yitro's in his home. Yitro gets permission from Moshe to leave. They have respect for each other in this relationship. It's a beautiful relationship, right? Did I convince you? All great. Now I'm going to flip it completely. You could read both of these stories in the total opposite way, that their relationship is actually really quite negative. So let me start from the beginning. Back to this week's Parsha, their first encounter with each other. Moshe is running away. He's running away and he meets this group of girls, and therefore they tell him to come over to their home. home to have a meal. Well, we have to remember Moshe has nowhere to go. Unlike Yaakov, who knows where he's going. His mother told him, run away from Esav, go to my brother's house, go find Lavan. So when he goes to the well, he has a destination. Where is Lavan, right? That's what he's trying to find out at the well. Moshe has no destination. He has no people. He has nobody. He is completely and utterly alone. He's going to go to the first person who lets him into that house. That's what he's going to do. And if you think about it, he probably is not going to tell them his story. He's probably going to keep it a secret. Who would let you in their home if you said, by the way, I murdered someone, so I'm a murderer, and the biggest power of the world wants me dead. Please, can I sleep over? Oh my gosh, nobody would let you in. And therefore, if you look a little bit at the language, you see hint to the fact that Moshe did not tell them stuff. Moshe kept this a secret. When the girls come home to their dad here in source 19, they call him Ish Mitzri Hetzilani, an Egyptian saved us, because it's very possible Moshe just let them believe whatever it was. I just left Mitzrayim and I need a place to stay. That's it. That's my story. And even in Chazal, Moshe's critiqued for this. Moshe's critiqued for the fact that he keeps his identity a secret. If you look at Dvarim Rabbah with me, it's a really interesting midrash. Amar of Levi, Amar Lefanav Rabbanu Shalom. Levi says, Moshe says in front of Hashem, Atzmotav shel Yosef nechnasu la'aretz v'ani eino nechnas la'aretz. I don't understand. Yosef's bones get taken out of Mitzrayim and brought into Eretz Yisrael, but me, my bones are like right outside Eretz Yisrael, and we couldn't bother to take my bones in. Why didn't I deserve to get my bones taken into Eretz Yisrael, to be buried in Eretz Yisrael? Amar lo Kadosh Baruch Hu mi shehoda b'artzo nikva b'artzo. If somebody admits to being part of the land, being part of the Jewish people, he deserves to be buried in the land. But if someone denies their association with the land or with the Jewish people, he does not deserve to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. What is he talking about? Says the Midrash, Ata shelo hadita ba'artzacha. You denied. You would not admit what you were connected to. And therefore, you, Moshe, einata nikvar ba'artzacha, you don't get to be buried there. What are we talking about? Ketzad, what story? Right here, quoting our pasuk. When they say, Ish mitzri etzilan miyad haroim, it was an Egyptian who saved us, who shomea v'shotek. Moshe was right there. He was listening and he was quiet. He let them believe it. So he's punished by God that he doesn't get buried in the land because of this. But what's the idea? The idea here is that he keeps it a secret, but logically so, of course he should keep it a secret. Why else would they let him in? And that also makes sense, therefore, when he wants to leave, what he says to Yitro. If he's never revealed his story to Yitro, now this all makes sense. He says to Yitro, please let me go. Please let me go back to visit my brothers in Mitzrayim. Who's he talking about? Well, probably he's making Yitro believe he's talking about the Mitzrayim, right? I left Mitzrayim and I joined your family. Oh, so now I just want to check up on my siblings. Do you mind? Can I go back to Mitzrayim, to see if they're still alive? And Yitro gives him permission to go. It is very possible he never tells them the truth. They have no idea about his life, his true life, of what occurred before he comes to their home. Or he does tell them. And if he does tell them, you probably in your mind could come up with what would have occurred had he told them. Well, you know what? That's exactly what Chazal does. In the Yalkut Shimoni, there's a story. It's a fascinating story. And whether it happened or it's this hypothetical idea of what would have occurred had Yitro known the truth, I think it fits very nicely into what we think should have happened. And here's how the story goes. Moshe tells Ruel, his father-in-law Yitro, the story. And what happens? What we would expect. When he hears the story, do you know what he does? He throws Moshe in jail. 10 years, Moshe is sitting in Yitro's jail. And you know what's implied in the story? He doesn't feed him. So he basically dooms him to death. How do I know that? Because the Medrash goes on. When he's locked up in jail, Sipora felt so bad for Moshe bat Ruel, of course, the daughter of Yitro, and she feeds him lechem v'mayim. And the story then goes on again. I'm not reading all of it inside because of time, but she goes to her dad and says that 10 years later, she's like, why don't we go check on them? You know that guy that you threw in jail? Why don't you check on him? And Ruel, her father, says back to her, well, that's crazy. He's dead. We never fed him. Is it possible you could put someone in jail, never feed them? 10 years later, they're going to be alive? That's absurd, he says to Zipporah. Of course, he's dead. But Zipporah convinces him, come, let's go check. Let's go check on him. And of course, what occurs, because she's been feeding him the whole time, so he's like, okay, fine, I'll go with you. I'll check on him. He listens to his daughter. Which reminds us of Yosef, right down in the pit. What's going on with Moshe? And he's sitting there davening to Hashem, and he's totally alive, right? Reminding us of Daniel, right? There's so many stories that are being alluded to here. And therefore, what does he do? He takes him out of the pit. It's miraculous. This guy lived 10 years with no food. Of course, he had food, but he doesn't know that. So he shaves him, changes his clothes, back inferences to Yosef coming out of jail, and he feeds him, and he says to him, okay, fine, you're this miraculous guy, I guess you deserve to live, so I'll let you marry Zipporah, who clearly liked Moshe, and obviously is deserving of Moshe, who fed him all this time, but again, still does not agree with who Moshe is. But he says you're not allowed to give a bris milah to your oldest son because I don't believe in the values that you believe in. Now, this understanding found in Chazal fits a very negative perspective of the relationship of Moshe and Yitro. They do not see eye to eye. I mean, if he jailed him for 10 years without food, that is a really bad way to start a relationship. But within the pshat, one could understand here, therefore, that there is a negative way to look at this story. Moshe comes, he either has to keep it a secret, or even if he doesn't keep it a secret, this is not something that the two of them agree upon. Yitro does not really approve of Moshe's choices. Yitro really doesn't want Moshe to return to that lifestyle. There's a second medrash which I found very interesting, going back to the language that I mentioned now a few times, Vayoel Moshe lashevet et ha'ish, right? Moshe stays with the man. And the medrash asks, why does it use the word Vayoel? That's from the lashon, from the language of Allah, which means to swear. Says the medrash that is correct, because Yitro made Moshe make a swear. You want to live in my house? You want to marry my daughter? Swear. What do you have to swear? Swear you're never going to leave and you're never going to go back to that lifestyle. Look at source 22 with me. Nishpa lo. He made him swear. Lamashbia, why did he make him swear? Amarlo, Yitro said to him, you know what? I know the story of Yaakov and Lavan, which we've now discussed a few times. I know what happened when Lavan let Yaakov marry his kids. Natzlan, one day he just ran away. He took his kids and he ran. Well, I'm not going to be like that. If I give you my daughter, you're going to do this too. We don't see eye to eye. You're going to run away. You're going to take her and go. So he had to swear to him, I'm not going to leave. I'm going to stay. V'natanlo et Zipporah, only then he gave him Zipporah. Married my daughter, you can work for me as well, but you're never allowed to leave. And therefore, the fact that he then tricks his father-in-law by saying, can I visit my brothers, right? That was getting permission to leave, right? That was Yaakov being able to, that was Moshe being able to get over on his swear, but that's not really the intention of what Yitro was saying when he gave him permission to leave. So to some extent, Moshe therefore is also running away from Yitro, the same way that Yaakov Vayivrachu runs away from his father-in-law Lavan, the same way that David runs away twice or more than that from Shaul. He runs away after he throws the spear at him, and he runs away again when Shaul tries to kill him in his own bed, and he has to run out of his own window, jump out of his window, and runs away. Here we have the initial story found in this week's Parsha in a very negative light. Moshe, who is kind of entrapped by Yitro because he can't go anywhere, he has nowhere else to go. He has to give in to Yitro's values while he's living there, and the end of the story is he escapes from Yitro. And therefore, if that's true, their reunion has to be completely different. And the first thing to point out by the reunion is Moshe never calls them. There is no implication in any way in the story that Moshe calls for Yitro to come find him or his family, but that's a shir unto itself. But rather, Yitro hears and says, hey, even though I didn't approve of this guy, look what he's doing. He's pretty amazing. I'm going to go back and reunite with my son-in-law who ran away from me. And if I look close again at the language here, yes, Moshe comes out towards his father-in-law, Vayishtachu, Vayishaklo. If you look closely at the language, that's in singular. He bowed to him, he kissed him. Then they both said, hi, how you doing? Says the Yalkut Shimoni, it could either be Moshe kissed and hugged his father-in-law, but in this interpretation, it certainly would be his father-in-law who surprised Moshe and said, hey, here I am. And he hugs him and he kisses him. And Moshe's response is, oh, how you doing, right? Not a response of hugging and kissing back, but rather, uh-oh, my father-in-law is here, and what do I need to do? I want to get rid of him as soon as I can. And therefore, if that's true, the story of Moshe and Yitro in Perek Yudchet is Moshe saying, all right, really fast, meet all my friends, really fast, come see what I do, really fast, let me tell you everything, and now please go home. However, it doesn't work out that way. And what Yitro does when he shows up that day to say to Moshe, I don't like what you're doing, I don't approve of what you're doing, that clearly is something that Moshe did not want to hear, disapproval by his father-in-law. So what do I do with the fact that I gave you a whole chart that seemed to show that Moshe did everything his father-in-law said to do? So what do I do with that fact? Well, let me ask you a question. Isn't it a little bit strange that in Shemot Perek Yudchet, right before Matan Torah, the story tells us Moshe takes 70 people based on the advice of his father-in-law to help him to judge the people, right? Fast forward now to Bamidbar Yud Aleph. I'm the second year in the desert, so I'm only like a year plus from that story. And Moshe turns to God and says, Lo uchal anochi levadi la'atzeit es kol hamazeh. I can't do all this by myself, Hashem. I need some help. And then God tells him to go gather shivim ish misiknei Yisrael. Well, why does he have to gather 70 people if he already gathered 70 people in Shemot Perek Yudchet? Where did those 70 people go? Then now all of a sudden Moshe's like, I'm on my own, I need more people. What happened in this story? There are two different possibilities to answer the question, again, within this negative view. Answer number one is Yitro gave him advice. I don't think what you're doing is correct. So what do you do if you don't like what somebody is telling you and you don't want to be disrespectful? You say, sure. Yeah, great idea. Okay, fine. Yitro, you're standing here fabulous. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 70 people. Done. They're my new officers. Oh, bye, Yitro. Thank you. Nice. And then I send them all home, right? It was all a facade. It was all a joke, right? This wasn't real, what he did in Shemot Yudchet. When does he truly collect the 70 people? That's in Bamidbar Yud Aleph. He doesn't listen to Yitro at all. He pretends he listens to Yitro, but he does not actually listen. Possibility number one. Possibility number two, found both in the Malbim and in the Abarbanel, is that yes, Moshe does, in theory, listen to Yitro, but he doesn't listen to Yitro in Shemot Perek Yudchet. He does not listen to Yitro before Matan Torah. Of course he doesn't. When does he gather the 70 people? In Bamidbar Yud Aleph. A year and so later, right? Almost 2 years later. He does not listen to Yitro right away. Says the Malbim, if you look closely, Shelo bachar tashoftim tekaf. He does not choose these people right away. Not at all. When does he do it? Bashana Shniya, in the second year, when he's in Midbar Sinai. That's, of course, the story of Bamidbar Yud Aleph. And says the Malbim, who was always very good with language, you have to see the difference, he says. Sheyesh hevdel ben Shmiya Bikhol and Shmiya Likhol. I think all parents know that there's a difference between these two things. Shmiya Bikhol means when our children listen to us and they actually do what we say. Shmiya Likhol is like they're listening to us, but they're totally ignoring us and they're not doing anything that we say. Says the Malbim, that's what's happening here. Moshe says, listened, Likhol. That's what the pasuk said. Ata sam lev l'dra. He listened, paid attention. Abali chalas, okay, but he didn't do it. He didn't do anything that Yitro told him to do. He does it much later. The Abarbanel actually points it out in a little bit of a stronger way. Moshe couldn't listen to Yitro right now. Yitro's idea was flawed, said the Abarbanel. Why is it that Moshe had to lead all the people? Because the Torah wasn't given yet. So how is anyone else other than Moshe, who has direct contact with God, going to tell people what is the correct judgment? Only Moshe knows what's the correct judgment until after Matan Torah. Once the Torah is given and Moshe gives over all the rules, he can then pick his 70 elite students to be part of the people that help train everybody else and teach everyone else. But at this moment in time, it's impossible for him to pick 70 people. Nobody else knows the Torah other than himself. So says the Abarbanel, Moshe actually thought Yitro's idea was flawed, but held on to it and said, you know what, it's not a bad idea. We'll do it later when it's appropriate, but I'm not going to do it because Yitro told me so. I'm going to do it because God told me so. When he does it, of course, as I underlined here, Velola tzat Yitro, I wasn't listening to Yitro. I'm listening to God and doing what's right years later. And therefore, the ending of the story of the reunion actually makes a lot of sense because the ending pasuk is Vayishalach Moshe tzchotno. He sends his father-in-law away. And normally in Tanakh Tanakh, the word Vayishalach is not a positive word. I'm sending you out. I'm pushing you out. I'm like literally pushing you out the door. And I give you a few examples of this where you could see it very clearly. When Noah is in the Teva and he wants to know if there's dry land or not. So what does he do? Vayishalach et hayonah. He sends out the bird. He says, go check if there's dry land. He did not want the Yonah lingering. He pushes it out the window. Or when Sodom is about to be destroyed and God wants to save Lot, Vayishalach et Lot mitoch hafecha. He pushes Lot out. He shoves him out from amongst the chaos. Or again, to save Yaakov from Esav, Vayishalach Yitzchak et Yaakov. He sends Yaakov away. He sends him go to the house of Lavan. And of course, to Paro, Vayishalach et bnei Yisrael me'artzo. We beg Paro, please send the Jewish people out of your land. It's a pushing of people out the door. And therefore here it fits much better in this negative view, which is Moshe's literally walking Yitro out. Like, it's time for you to go, Dad, right? It's time for you to go away. Now, two very different perspectives, right? What do I do? Is it a positive relationship? Is it a negative relationship? I'm not sure. But here's what's fun, since we do have some time left, to discover that there's a third story, or maybe a possible third story that can help enlighten us in terms of this relationship and help enlighten us to the messaging that we're supposed to take away from this relationship. And that is, if I fast forward to Bamidbar Perek Yud. In Bamidbar Perek Yud, I'm going to read you these psukim. They are crazy, strange, weird psukim. And the story goes like this. Vayomer Moshe lechovav ben Reuel hamidjani chotein Moshe. Moshe says to a guy by the name of Chovav, the son of Reuel, who's from Midjan, who we are now calling the father-in-law of Moshe. And he says, we are going to a place, we're traveling to a place that God said that he was going to give to you, including him amongst the Jewish people, obviously talking about Israel. Come with us. It'll be good for you. God said he was going to be good for the Jewish people. Whoever this guy is, Chovav says back, Lo elech, no, I don't want to go. I want to go back to my land. I want to go back to my birthplace. And then Moshe tries again. No, please don't leave us. You know how the camping works in the midbar. You know the path. Will be for us eyes. And why did I end the psukim here? Because that's where the story ends. Cliffhanger. I have no idea. Did the guy say yes? Did the guy say no? I have no clue. The story just ends. What a strange story. But what's even weirder about the story is I don't know who this guy is. This is very odd. Chovav ben Reuel. Why is that so odd? Because in one place, Yitro is called Reuel, and in another place, Yitro is called Chovav. But you can't have Yitro, the son of Yitro. Who is this guy? Where are those places that I'm referring to? Here in source 30. When the girls run home from the well after being saved by Moshe in this week's Parsha, they run to Reuel, their father, right? So that would make Reuel the same guy as Yitro, which would make Chovav ben Reuel not Yitro, but Yitro's son, a new character we've never heard of before, the brother of Sipporah by the name of Chovav. However, on the other hand, if I look at Shoftim Perek Daled, when we're hearing in the future about descendants of Yitro who live amongst the Jewish people, we call them Bnei Chovav, the Chotein of Moshe. So Chotein Moshe means the father-in-law of Moshe. Now Chovav has to be the father-in-law of Moshe, which would make Chovav Yitro. So who is this guy, Chovav ben Reuel? Is he Yitro, or is he Yitro's son, meaning Moshe's brother-in-law? So there are two interpretations, and the Mefarshim line up on both sides. The most popular approach is that this is Yitro, and we find that here in source 31 in Rashi, who right away says who Yitro, and he had a lot of names, and this Chovav is one of his many names. The Rashbam then points out, which is interesting for this week's Parsha. So if Chovav is Yitro, then that means Reuel is Avi Avihen. Reuel has to be the grandfather. So therefore in this week's Parsha, when he's invited into the home by Reuel, and Reuel says, why are you home so early? Go get the guy, right? That's the grandpa. That's a new guy, right? That's not actually Yitro. And you might say to me, oh, well, if he's really the grandfather, why do we call him the father? So I gave you another pasuk here where Yaakov is talking about Avi Avraham. We know Avram's his grandfather, not his father. So father and grandfather are interchangeable in Tanakh. It could be that we are therefore referring to the grandfather. But very quickly, if it is Yitro, why are we calling him Chovav? So I gave you the Medrash Nechama, which is the source of Rashi, that he has 7 names, so many different names, and therefore one of them is Chovav. And I love the Ramban's interpretation that when he converts to become part of the Jewish people, Ki Chovav Shem Chadash Shekru Yitro Kasher Shav LaToras Yisrael. When he converts, as we all know, converts get new names. So we got a new name by the name of Chovav, which is why now after Matan Torah, his name is Chovav, but it's really all the same guy. Okay, that's all very nice. But if this is Yitro, I'm very confused, because let's review, right? We meet up with Yitro in Shemot Perek Bet. We then meet up back up with him. We have a reunion with him in Shemot Perek Yud. The ending, I just focused on the pasuk, whether it was a positive or a negative ending. We sent Yitro home. So how is he back in Bamidbar Yud? He left. He went to Midian. Two interpretations. Here, source 35, Rashi said, well, when he left at the end of Parshas Yitro, it was temporary. He wasn't leaving permanently. He went back L'Gayeretz B'nei Mishpato. He went back first time he came to meet with Moshe. He brought Zipporah and the sons, and now he's like, hey, this guy's awesome, so I'm going to bring my whole family. I want the whole family to come join the Jewish people. So he went back to Midian for a period of time just to get the rest of his family. Nice proof for this I gave you here in these 3 psukim, where we see later in Shoftim and Shmuel that there are other relatives that come from Yitro that seem to live amongst the Jewish people. Nice proof that he went back to go get them. Okay, very nice. So that's one interpretation, and let's understand the story then this way. Yitro reunites with Moshe. He then goes home to go find some of his family. He then returns, which is not mentioned in the psukim. And now here in Bamidbar Yud, he's threatening to leave again. And Moshe is saying to him, please don't go, please don't go. And he's saying, no, I want to go home. And we have no idea if he decides to go or if he decides to stay. Version number 1 of the story, if this is Yitro. Version number 2 is a very interesting one, which is found in many of the Mefarshim, which is that, you know what? We have 2 different stories, and they're both really one story. Yitro comes and he goes once. That's it. For some reason, a piece of that story is in Shemot Yechet, and a piece of that story is in Bamidbar Yud, but it's really one story. The story goes, Yitro comes and visits Moshe. Yitro's about to go home. Moshe says, please don't go, please don't go. And then Yitro says, no, I'm going. And he goes home. And Moshe, therefore, Vayishalach et Yitro, walks his father-in-law or escorts his father-in-law out. It's really all one story. The debate in the Mefarshim, if I look at it this way, is, well, when did the story occur? When did he come and when did he go? Did he go before Matan Torah? Did he come and go before Matan Torah, which is where most of the story is in Shemot Yechet? Did he come and go at some point and then leave after Matan Torah? So this is debated in the Mefarshim. If you're curious, the Ramban and Shadal both agree all of it occurred before Matan Torah. He came, reunited with Moshe, decided to leave. Moshe said, please don't go. And he decided to go anyway. And even though that piece of the story is in Bamidbar, it really all happened before Matan Torah. It all happened in Shemot. However, there's Ibn Ezra, Radak, and Rashbam who say, no, the whole thing happened after Matan Torah. Yitro came after Matan Torah. Moshe said, please don't go. And he decided to leave, all in the story by Bamidbar Perek Yud. Or we have a combination. Abarbanel, Malbim, Rabag say he came before Matan Torah, stayed for close to 2 years, and then decided to leave after Matan Torah. And that's when Moshe says, please don't go. And he decides to leave. No matter which way I look at it, the story is now Yitro comes and Yitro leaves. And Moshe says, please don't go, but Yitro decides to leave. That is the second version of the story, if this is Yitro. And if it's Yitro, just by the way, I gave you 2 Mefarshim here, which I'm going to run through quickly in source 36, then what do I do with the fact that his relatives still live in the land? So it says, Sfarno says, it's not a big deal. He leaves. Avav b'nei Yitro halchu in Yisrael, but doesn't mean the rest of the family left. Yitro left. He left alone. Hu alach levadol. So he decides to leave, but the rest of the family stays. Okay, so we so far have an idea that if this guy Chovav is Yitro, we either know the story, he comes and he goes, Yitro leaves, or it's a story of Yitro coming, going, coming back, and then we have no clue if he comes or goes at the end of the story. Okay, put that to the side. Second version of the story, this guy Chovav is not Yitro, but rather it's a new character. It's the brother of Zipporah, who we've never heard about before. It's the son of Yitro. This view is not one of my own, meaning I didn't make it up. It's actually found in Ibn Ezra. Matzanu shetzipporah hi bat Ruel. If Zipporah is the daughter of Ruel, and then this guy Chovav is the son of Ruel, well, put that together, says Ibn Ezra. Hinehu achi Zipporah. Clearly, this is the brother of Zipporah, and he says it is normal. Chatan does not always mean father-in-law. Chatan can mean also brother-in-law. The word chatan can mean both. I gave a shadal here who quotes Rav Yonah ibn Ganach, who says the exact same thing. Chovav hu ben liyitro ve'ach letzipora. This is the brother. This is a very different story. This is the brother. And I actually just gave you here in source 38 proof that the word chatan actually just means in-law. It could mean father-in-law, son-in-law, brother-in-law. It can mean any of those things. It's normally used as a father-in-law, but it doesn't have to be. Here in the story of Lot, when he's trying to convince his son-in-laws to come join him, they're called chatan. Or David, when he's talking about marrying Michal, he says, am I going to be the chatan lamelech? Am I going to be the son-in-law of the king? Clearly, chatan can mean father-in-law, son-in-law, or brother-in-law, and therefore chovav could be the brother-in-law. But now let me take a step back, because if this is a brother-in-law, a new character I've never met before, what do I care about this guy? I mean, why do I have a story of Moshe begging his brother-in-law, who I've never heard of, to please stay with Am Yisrael? And again, I have no idea if he says yes or no at the end of the story. But I want to make the question a little bit bigger, because if you look at the context of the story, it's really very, very strange. The story takes place, as I told you, in Bamidbar Parak Yud. Do you know what just occurred in Bamidbar Parak Yud? Well, if I go through what's going on, is we're getting ready to go into Eretz Yisrael. It's before we sin, so we're about to go right in. We count the Jewish people. We set up the Degala. We're ready to go. We have the cloud ready to lead us. We're blowing the Chatzotzros. And then we have this weird story of the brother, this really weird story. And you know what comes right afterwards? Source 39, famous psukim. We say it in shul. Vayhi ben so Aaron, we're about to travel. Here we go. We're about to go into Eretz Yisrael. So the story gets even weirder because it's such a strange story, but it's in such a pivotal moment in Moshe's life and in Jewish history. We're about to walk into Eretz Yisrael. If we hadn't sinned, we were going right in. Why would I tell this really weird story right before this huge event? So in order to put this all together, I want to take another step backwards and think about Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe Rabbeinu has a very strange situation. You know, many of us have two families. We have the family we're born to, and then of course we have the family that we marry into. Moshe Rabbeinu had three families, right? It's a little bit strange, a very different situation. He had his Jewish family, he had his Egyptian family, and he had his Midian family. He had three different families, which means he actually had three different father figures. He has his Jewish father, which I gave you here in source 40, all the different places in Tanakh where it reminds us that Amram is the birth father of Moshe. I don't know if Amram and Moshe had a relationship. Nothing is recorded as an interaction between them, but I do know that Moshe grew up until he was weaned in the house of his parents. His mother nursed him, so he probably had a relationship with his father. And then it's possible when he returns to Am Yisrael and has a relationship with his sister Miriam and his brother Aaron that he reunites with his parents. It's possible, but we don't know. But that's his Jewish father. And then, of course, we have his Egyptian father, which is Paro, right? He grows up in the house of Paro. We have Midrashim about him playing on Paro's lap. And of course, that ends badly. Source 41, he kills an Egyptian, and his own father, Paro, wants to kill him, and he has to run away from his father. And then we have this third father figure in his life, which is Yitro, of course. And as we just finished discussing, we're not sure if that was a positive or a negative relationship. But interesting enough, he not only therefore would have three father figures, he has in Tanakh three brother figures, maybe giving some purpose to our guy named Chovav. We have, of course, his Jewish brother, which is Aaron, which we know from the Psukim, right? Aaron is the one who runs out to greet Moshe to bring him back into the Jewish people. And we know in general, he's the one that stands by his side and helps him throughout his leadership. We also have the Paro that takes over after the Paro that died, which would assume to be somebody who probably grew up with him in the palace, similar in his own age, which would be the brother from the Egyptian side. And maybe now I can argue he's got his Midian brother, right? He's got Zipporah's brother, Chovav, who now is coming up in the story. And therefore, here I'm left in this weird situation of understanding Moshe's weird situation of three different families. And I have a story right before this pivotal moment of Moshe taking the Jewish people, which was assumed to be and was supposed to be going directly into Eretz Yisrael. And he's pleading with this person, who I don't know who it is, please stay with me, please stay with me. And we don't know if the guy says yes or no. So the question here is, what is the story about? Well, there's two possibilities to the ending of the story. Whether it's the father or it's the brother, it doesn't matter. The ending is either he says, no, I'm not coming with you, or the ending is he changes his mind and he comes with. Let me play it out in both ways. If the guy decides at the end, no, I'm not listening to you. I'm going home. I don't want to be part of your life. Then whether this is his father-in-law Yitro or his brother that we're now calling his brother-in-law Chova, what you have here in this story is Moshe, who has taken upon himself this really hard mission. He has to connect himself to Am Yisrael. And by doing that, he has to destroy his Egyptian family, not just the nation, but his own brother, right? And he possibly as well has to leave behind his Midian family as well. He has to separate them from them as well. And that's what this story really is all about. Him turning to his Midian family and to some extent pleading with them to come with and then rejecting him. If you look at here at source 43, God really kind of hints to him. You want to be part of this? This is at the SNAD, this week's Parsha. No, I'm the God of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. You got to connect to this family. You have to disconnect from your other families. And if I look closely at the language that this person, again, Chovav, says to Moshe, it means a lot to me. He says, Lo elech, I will not go, ki el artzi vel moladeti elech. To my birthland, my land and my birthplace, I will go. Well, that reminds me of the flip of Abraham. Abraham was told, Lech lecha, leave your land, leave your birthplace to join and create the Jewish people. Or Rivka, who says, Elech, I will go. Here we have this person who is rejecting the values of Moshe and saying, I do not want your people. I do not want your land. I don't want what you want. And Moshe is standing here at Vayehi ben Soaron and has to leave that family behind. It's heart-wrenching a little bit, but that's what the story is really about. And if you look at Shadal actually brings it up and says, the person who says this, Lo elech, clearly this is not someone who's converting. This is someone who is saying, I don't want to be part. You need to leave me behind. And therefore, this is the story of Moshe maybe picking the righteous father, right? He's picking Amram, who we're told is the Gadol Hador or the Rosh Sanhedrin, or he's picking the righteous brother. He's picking the correct brother, the Aaron, who again, for time, I'm not going through these psukim, we know Aaron who's with him throughout his entire leadership. And Aaron, of course, he's chosen to be the Kohen Gadol. And maybe that's one version of the story. Moshe here at Vayehi ben Soa is turning to, again, is the father-in-law, the brother-in-law, it doesn't really matter, saying, don't you want to be part? Don't you want to be part of this picture? And they're like, no, we don't agree with this. This is not part of our perspective. And Moshe has to leave them behind to join the Jewish people. It's such a fascinating way to look at that story. The second way is to say the person says yes. Whoever that person is, whether it's Yitro or it's the brother-in-law, doesn't matter, but the person says yes. And I can even see it through the fact that in Chazal, there's a lot of positive perspective about Yitro. Right here, I gave you source 48, the beautiful midrash that Yitro was one of the advisors of Paro who says, don't hurt the Jewish people. But maybe here we're at the crossroads and Moshe's saying to this person, I want to take this family with. I had to leave behind my Egyptian family, but you know what? My Midian family, if you could take on my values, you get to join me. You get to come with me. I don't have to leave you behind. And to some extent, it reminds me of Rus who has to say, Amecha mi velokai chalokai. I want to be part. So I'm going to leave my nation behind. I'm going to join your nation. I'm going to leave my gods behind, and I'm going to join your God. And again, for time, I'm not reading inside, but I hope you all will. Source 50, the Alsha connects these two stories. Just like Rus had to leave behind her God, that's what Moshe is saying. You want to go back home, you're all inspired by my Hashem, but if you go back, you're going to go back to your old lifestyle. You're going to go back to your old God. You want to stick with my God? Come with me. Please come with me. Please don't leave me behind. And possibly if it's the brother-in-law, he's begging him. We're so close. We have such a beautiful relationship. Maybe like the one of Yonatan and David. Please come with me. Please don't leave me behind. But here's the ending of the story, which is I don't know. I don't know if the guy said yes. I don't know if the guy said no. I really have no idea. So when I leave the story, I'm like, now what? What am I supposed to do? What's the lesson I'm supposed to take? I don't understand. So I look at the story again. Source 52, I gave it to you again. Because you know what? Sometimes in Tanakh, when you have so many questions, you have to figure out what's the detail God actually gave me. And that must be the lesson, because that's got to be the takeaway, because this is the one thing I know. And if I look at the story, I don't know who he is, and I don't know if he stays. But what I do know is the invitation. Moshe says, no, Siman Nachnu, please, we're traveling, please come with me. And the guy says no, and he says, no, please, it'll be good for you, it'll be fine for you, please come come with, says the Ramban, he promised him a piece of land. He says, you can live in the land, you could become part of Am Yisrael, please come, please come. And we again don't know the ending to the story. And I actually think that that's the key message. That's the key message to relationships with in-laws and to relationships with everyone. Moshe Rabbeinu is teaching us that whether they say yes or no at the end of the day is not the message. I don't know what happened to Moshe and his relationship with Yitro or with Chovav. I have no idea. But what I do know is that he's saying when you have a relationship that especially has by definition gaps to it. We come from different places. We have different lands. We have different cultures. We're different people, right? What do you got to do to build that?
You are muted.
I'm muted?
No, that's.
I'm good. Can I finish? I got 2 more minutes to go. I'm good.
Keep going.
What is the answer? Nosim anachnu. We're traveling. Ba'itanu. Sending out that invitation. That's what Moshe is saying. At the end of the day, whether they come or not, I don't know. But the point that Moshe is saying, especially in the in-law relationship where you're different families, different places, different two families coming together, but I like to believe that this is the solution to all relationships. This is the key to anytime somebody has a difficulty in a relationship, it's because the person needs an invitation. They need an invitation in. Very often when fighting occurs, it's because somebody feels like walls are built up, or someone's being left out, or somebody feels insulted, or somebody wasn't invited. And therefore, what's the way to solve those problems? Nosim anachnu ba'itanu. That's the solution that Moshe is telling us. Before you're doing that next big step, before Moshe Rabbeinu starts that journey into Eretz Yisrael, he turns to these relatives who are outsiders, whoever they are, and says, why don't you come with us? That's the key to fixing relationships. And I just wanted to close on a little bit of a personal note, especially I just lost my grandmother 2 weeks ago. And I was really thinking about, with COVID and all that's going on, this message that I was speaking about here tonight. And I think that so often when it comes to relationships, and especially ones that are wonderful, but also ones that are difficult, we think we have endless time. We think we have time to work on them. We think we have time to make those phone calls. We have time to invite people in. We have time, we have endless time. And all of a sudden, I think what a lot of us are learning really sadly is in a really quick amount of time, we don't have time anymore. The time is gone. And I therefore think for this year today, and in the way I'm feeling today, and this plus my grandmother, we should all make a commitment, to those relationships of people that are important to us, to relationships that we keep saying we're going to mend, but we got time, we'll mend them, we'll deal with them. Let's be like Moshe right now. Let's cherish the relationships we have. Let's work on the ones that need work by using his motto, Nosim anachnu ba'itanu. Let's invite these people back into our lives, not into our homes, obviously with COVID, but into our lives. And let's try to mend all difficult relationships and of course, improve all relationships that we have with our lives. I think I am to the minute, so thank you very, very much, everyone. It is always a pleasure to give you shir. I will see you all soon, and hopefully also at the mikvah event. And I will unshare if anybody has any quick questions, but it has been a pleasure teaching you all tonight.